Oh, there we are. Bonjour, bonjour. Bonjour. I'm never sure when to stop dancing, and I don't actually know. I imagine that everyone on this webinar hears the music, and I hope everyone is also dancing. Good evening, Dr. Varden. Welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you?
Good evening to you. I am doing quite well. And I like how we have this like opposite thing going on. Dark hair, white, whitish hair, darkish hair. No, we're
You
doing
you have magnanimous silver locks. You have so many hair goals with how it cascades and how it curls. So I like the balance. I like it. It's like what's the movie? I'm not cool enough to know this. There's a movie that's premiering and it's like Good Witch, Bad Witch. It's Wicked.
oh,
Wicked.
yes.
Yeah, there we
That is
go. I
yeah,
like
that's
it.
a Broadway musical as well.
Oh, fun. And we dance and we sing. And this evening we are going to be dancing and singing all around histamine. So, welcome to our audience. Welcome to those curious about histamine. I hope this evening serves as something that helps you identify what exactly histamine is, what it does within your body, and why we need to be mindful of it, and ways that you can support yourself being mindful of it, right? Because I think most people by and large kind of associate it with allergies. You're exposed to a certain allergen, you get histamine, you swell up a little bit, and then you move on. But it plays itself into other health conditions. And so we want to have that conversation, right? How does histamine crop up in the body, and what exactly do you do about it? Yeah. So I think as we do some of the introduction conversation here, is as maybe Dr. Varden and I, Lara, you and I talk through what exactly histamine is, what can trigger it, lay some of our foundational work. Please fill out a survey so that we know who is here and we know how to best speak to you. This time is meant to support you, not us necessarily. So let us know what you want to know. Yeah. And on that note, why don't we start, at least lay some groundwork for our friends in the audience? Why don't we start talking about what exactly histamine is, what triggers it, what it does downstream?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, histamine. It's a signaling molecule. Uh,
Mhm.
is really important because as a signaling molecule, it plays a part in inflammation, the allergic reactions that you were mentioning earlier.
Mhm.
It is primarily stored in mast cells, and this is where the mast cell activation syndrome comes from,
Mhm.
that I'm sure some of our audience is aware of, or unfortunately may have dealt with or are dealing with. It's also, histamines are also found in basophils. Now, these are types of immune cells, as with mast cells, um, and they're found in tissues and in the bloodstream. So,
Mhm.
when the body detects an allergen or a pathogen, histamine is released from the cells, and that triggers a lot of different physiological reactions that help the body to respond to that perceived threat.
Mhm.
So, it really is that, big megaphone going, hey guys, we got a problem here, all hands on deck type of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. And it's
So,
always curious as to what exactly that perceived threat is. So for the audience that doesn't know, I'm one of those special little bubble children. I'm allergic to peanuts. I've always been very well aware of what histamine is. I'd love to hear in the chat if there's any other little bubbles out there like me that are also allergic to peanuts or one of those big reactions. But I think that tends to be the most commonly known histamine reaction, right? You have the little child that innocently, oh no, they pick up a peanut and mon Dieu, they swell up. So what's happening there is that little peanut, the body has identified that is a threat. So the mast cells, the beta cells, all those happy little workers within your immune system, they come into action. So there's an element of the body is responding appropriately, at least to what it thinks it needs to respond to, and it pumps out all of the histamine. Within the body, there are many different receptors, many different sites that can receive this histamine. Okay, you have some in your stomach that will help with, stomach acid. You have a lot in your lungs and other tissues. This is what we associate with that allergic reaction, that the moment that histamine binds to them, they start to swell up. And that it's within the throat that creates that kind of very typical histamine reaction that we're all aware of and that, you grab the EpiPen to solve for. But there's other histamine receptors in the body, some that exist in the gut, some that exist in the brain. And so not all histamine reactions are created equal, right? Is that a fair statement there, Dr. Varden?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have to remember that we are a systems biology. Everything is connected.
Yeah.
And it's not just those typical things that we think of, oh, anaphylaxis, and
Hmm.
or itchy, because like pet dander, people who are allergic to cats, and we love your kitties. But unfortunately, there are those who are allergic, and that is actually a histamine reaction. So it can actually present and work in the body in many different ways. But I think that tonight we are actually going to be touching upon some ways that people don't normally think about, that they may not be aware that, hey, this is a histamine reaction. There is something going on that histamines are playing a part in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think before we dive into kind of the perils of where we don't like it, we will quickly at least acknowledge a little bit. Histamine does play a positive role outside of the immune role, right? Of educating, of like, hey, maybe in the environment there's something that we don't want present. Histamine will swell tissues to try and avoid it within the stomach, right? There's a lot of, I think it's about 60% of the American population is on some form of something to help with indigestion, or namely acid reflux, right? And so one of the agents that is targeted there is histamine receptors within the gut, right? So before you get into that troubled state of acid reflux and trying to suppress histamine in the gut, one of its primary roles is it's naturally released within the stomach, and it curates and supports um, acid and other things that help with digestion, right? So I think to Lara's point here, everything is within a system and a context. Histamine can be a good thing. You don't want to completely eliminate it because it supports digestion, right? Yeah. But now that we've said the good about it, maybe we explore the bad about it, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I do want to reiterate, I mean, it's kind of like LDL cholesterol being called the bad
Mm,
cholesterol. Histamines
yeah.
get such a bad rap. And it's
Yeah.
like they're there for a reason, they have a job to do. So even though we don't necessarily like, what happens when they're doing their job, or sometimes the aftermath of them doing their jobs, they're doing a job. And it's really important because we don't want these pathogens. We
Yeah.
don't want these, foreign things that could cause further issues with our bodies. We don't want them creating that havoc. So, these guys, the histamines, even though, again, we may not like what they produce necessarily, they're really, really important. And, especially in the body's immune system. And we know that the gut is primarily the immune system. And,
Mhm. Mm.
they are acting as the first responders during this. And, you know, for the strength of the immune system is the strength of the gut. And, I love how you brought up the good things that they do. So we don't want to demonize them too much.
Yeah, yeah. But on that note, let's start focusing where they become problematic, because I think that's a lot of where people want to understand. So maybe one of the first points I think that you and I at least talked about, one of the things that histamines can increase within people is anxiety, right? So if you're someone where the body perceives a threat, and this could be a literal threat. So for me, it's a peanut. Heaven forbid those little lentils, they disturb my body. But in other people, this can be more of a situational threat. You get stressed out, right? How many times have we had the reaction where you get stressed out and you blush a little bit, right? There's that flushing, right? Part of that, not all of that, but part of that is a histamine reaction, right? Body perceives a threat and the immune system goes to greet it, right? And one way that histamine can play into this anxiety, right? So you spill out all that histamine into the system. within your brain, you have a lot of different histamine receptors, and some of them, when engaged, really create that sensation of stress and anxiety. There's an alertness that comes with that to an extent, right? If you're truly being threatened, you want that alertness. But if it's, more of a modern day threat, something that's truly not threatening, but we still have anxiety responses to it, right? That histamine response can be disproportionate. And so if you're not managing your histamine properly, this can further that stress response, right?
And I am going to slide this in there because
Please.
we are talking about the brain and that mood behavior aspect. Okay, histamine is also in the pain response,
Mm.
that sensory modulation. I mean, I've dealt with this myself,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to chronic pain, which can really affect mood very much so,
Yeah.
where histamine can actually sensitize pain receptors, making it almost seem hypersensitive. And that can, like conditions like fibromyalgia,
Yeah.
migraines. Oh, I used to suffer terribly with migraines. And
Yeah.
when you're talking about mast cell activation, especially when it happens near nerves, that can actually really enhance the pain signal. And you want to make someone miserable, enhance their pain. It's it's rough.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you were mentioning about the different receptors,
Yeah.
because there's the different histamine receptors, which are usually you'll see as like H and then a number like H1.
Right.
And for this, like with itching, okay,
Mhm.
pruritus. I have a very good friend that deals with pruritus,
Mm.
and these receptors are very much involved in that itching and can be exacerbated by, or in those conditions where you have skin issues like eczema, psoriasis, or any type of allergic skin reactions, which can enhance the pain because with all of the
Mm.
nerves. So, and of course, nerves, brain, central nervous system, peripheral nervous system,
Yeah.
and that all connected for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I think to the end of just overall health management, right? Understanding how sensitive is your immune system, right? The more sensitive your immune system is, be it in general, you have a more sensitive one, or situational insofar as you're stressed and therefore the immune system is a little bit more influenced by the environment and a little bit more trigger happy, right? Knowing how much histamine is exposed and how you respond to it can be really important because if you've just said, independent of histamine, you have some condition that's causing pain when you're going through those stressful periods, or maybe if you're exposed to an allergen that would create this histamine reaction, being aware of that and doing things to reduce your histamine is going to be really, really important. Yeah, both from the end of reducing things that trigger histamine and then increasing things that help with the clearance of histamine. Right. So what are ways, short of someone with a peanut allergy like myself, and it's very obvious that I have histamine imbalances in that instance, let's explore some different ways where you might know you have a little bit of a struggle with histamine. Either, you make too much or you don't clear it out very well. So I think anxiety, right, can be one of those things. Um, I think separate to that, obviously the skin reactions, right? That's a very obvious one. I think
Like
one of
what I just said about enhanced or exacerbated pain, like the
yeah,
hypersensitivity to that.
yeah.
So that's something to be aware of.
Hmm. And I think an interesting one that we two spoke about beforehand, and this is very specific to the female population there, in particular those that are menstruating or going through the cessation thereof, and maybe, experimenting with BHRT, estrogen levels play into and encourage the creation of histamine. And so at different points throughout your month, or perhaps different points throughout your BHT or your menopause experience, your sensitivity to and your creation of histamine is going to be different. Yeah.
Oh,
Do you want to speak a little bit to that one?
yeah, because estrogen actually promotes mast cell activation and histamine release. And again, it's not that this is a horrible, terrible thing and it should never do it at all. There is a reason for it. It's just we don't want it to get out of hand and become overwhelming to the system to where it is so
Yeah.
sensitive. But when you're talking about higher levels of estrogen, especially, those periods of the cycle, ovulation, pregnancy, or even for people like me who have estrogen dominance, well, an estrogen dominant profile. Of course, then again,
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that I have super high estrogen levels, and we have to
Yeah.
be clear about that to our audience, that just because your DNA profile says something doesn't mean you are necessarily presenting blood work, urine, like through a Dutch test, that you are estrogen dominant,
Mhm.
in your current lab work. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear. But at those times when your estrogen levels are higher, that can actually exacerbate symptoms, you know,
Mhm. Yeah.
and that can include women who have conditions like PMS, endometriosis,
Yeah.
things like that. I mean, I remember, PMS for me, very difficult. Migraines, big time. Of course, there were other factors as well, living in a moldy
Yeah.
house and doing other things, but that is the aggravation. You've got these underlying issues, and then you throw more uh, problems on top of your body that are enhancing that immune response, increasing the histamine, and then you have higher estrogen on top of that. It's just like this perfect storm.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
but being aware that this happens, and then for progesterone, okay, that's actually a modulator. It helps to stabilize mast cells and can counteract the histamine release. So actually that offers a protective effect, especially during the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle, which is
Yeah.
that after ovulation, before you actually start menstruating, during that time when your progesterone is higher.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this really calls for, in particular, and we had a really good conversation around with, in particular, with females, with women, and I'm going to circle back to men because I think that's important too, but in particular with females, right? Your response to different things over the course of your life is always going to be changing. So as Dr. Varden just said, when you're within that first half of your cycle, especially earlier on in your life, there's going to be more estrogen that's going to be prominent. Perhaps you're going to be a little bit more sensitive to histamine and other environmental triggers. As your cycle continues into that second half, maybe that's going to be balanced a little bit by progesterone, maybe not so much as you get older, as that starts to taper off a little bit. We get closer to menopause, progesterone is not going to be made in the same way it was made in our youth. So there's an element of knowing where you are in your cycle will influence how you're going to be responding to histamine. And what you need to hear from that is not this fatalistic shoot, at certain points in my cycle, I'm not going to be able to help myself. It's more, let's plan your life accordingly. Maybe during those points where you're more sensitive to histamine because your hormones are shifted, so you reduce things that encourage histamine, or separate, you do things that encourage the clearance thereof, right? All of this is to be used to the end of strategy, right? Um, I think when it comes to men in particular, oh, oh, you're very welcome, Audrey. Thank you for the feedback there. And thank you, Dr. Barnes, for so eloquently tossing that all out there. Um, Perhaps before we go on a little bit further, I'd love to pull that poll question up because I want to make sure we know who we're talking to, and we can ensure that we're really addressing things that you have. I'm seeing some people putting questions in the question and answer box. I'm seeing a few comments within our chat, but please make sure if there's something in particular you want us to be talking through and it wasn't captured in the survey that I'm going to quickly speak to now, that you're tossing it up there somewhere so that we we can dive deeper into it, right? Dr. Varden and I have a loose script, loose how we think things are going to go, but we are both happy and able to adjust what we're doing to accommodate what you're seeking to know. Yeah. So our first question here is saying, have you ever experienced histamine related intolerances? 85% of our audience said yes. So I'm curious. I'd love to know in the chat what exactly that was. Are you delicate snowflake like me and allergic to peanuts, or is that something
Are
else
you
a little bit
someone
more
like me where it does take a lot to really ruffle me?
There we go. The white and the black. We're showing polarities there. I love that. I'm slightly jealous because like I sit on the grass and my body's like, cool, we're gonna be a giant hive for a day.
Oh, I love rolling in the grass.
Me too. My body doesn't, but I do. It's a delicate little balance there. Please, any other grass lovers, let us know. All right, the second, oh, that could be taken
I know, I
multifactorially.
just thought of that. That was good though.
My words came out quicker than my brain. That's okay. All right. Um, the next question we have here is, are you familiar with the role of genetics in health conditions that are related to histamine intolerance and histamine inflammation? So I think a majority of our audience, 55% said somewhat, but 35% said not at all. So we'll have to make sure we speak to some genetic factors. I think in particular on the cleanup, right? There's an element of you can't always control what you're exposed to that inspires histamine, but we can look at how do we support the cleanup of it. And I think that's an important one. Another question here we asked, are you currently taking any steps to manage histamine-related conditions such as dietary changes, supplements, all the fun things? And I value the honesty here. 60% of the audience said, yeah, but I'm still figuring it out, right? So there's a little bit of an awareness that histamine plays into their health, but not entirely sure what to do. I value that. And then 30% of the audience said, nope, I'm not able to or not currently managing these symptoms. So another call out to people of how we're going to be supportive. And I hope by the end of this webinar, you're better directed as to what you can do to support some of this, especially in that proactive way, right? The last question we have here, why are you attending the webinar? What are you hoping to know? And we have a fairly equal split here. So 30% of the audience just wants to know about the genetics. 40% wants to understand that management. So we'll really dig into that side of things. And then a happy 20% is also looking to explore the gut and how the gut can influence histamine. So why don't we then, Dr. Varden, given the audience is really seeking to know the genes behind it and separately some of the management behind it, why don't we explore some of the genes that we examine in the DNA 360 that are related to histamine, namely the histamine cleanup? Why don't we start there? So you're exposed to something, be it a stress, a peanut, whatever it might be, that has created a histamine reaction, right? What are the genes involved in some of the cleanup there?
Well, when we're talking about cleanup, we're really talking about your detoxification pathways. So, it's really a matter of histamine breakdown, okay, is regulated obviously by several key genes.
Mhm.
And for the ones that we test and report, these would be including like the glutathione conjugation pathway. So the GST genes, so that's your GSTT1, GSTM1, and GSTP1, as well as the COMT gene, COMT, because that actually helps to break down neurotransmitters and histamine in the brain and nervous system. And, obviously that can affect histamine levels. So, for people who may have a slower COMT, okay, an AA version, that could actually lead to histamine buildup and can increase the risk of intolerance, inflammation. So these are different things to pay attention to and to look at in your reports to say, oh gosh, how well is this working? How well am I clearing these toxins? How well am I clearing, these neurotransmitters, the histamine through these particular genes? So that's one particular. And then of course, methylation pathway. I mean, we can never overlook the importance of the methylation pathway, because really COMT is that last player
Yeah.
of the methylation pathway. It is what is putting that methyl group onto that substrate, that toxin, that histamine, that, estrogen metabolite, whatever it is that needs to be cleared, to finish being broken down and cleared out of the system. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I always am amazed by how far reaching an improvement someone can see, especially when they come in with kind of a general inflammatory concern, like a non-specific complaint. And histamine sometimes falls into this bucket, right? We've just said it can create anxiety in the brain. It can create incredible skin reactions. It can shift how you're breathing in the lungs, probably one of the more scarier consequences of it, but then also influence digestion and immune. It's a very general thing. And given that COMT, by way of methylation, is a huge influencer in how we clean up histamine. So for those people who are a lot more sensitive or, trigger happy, they create a lot of histamine, having your methylation system in check is vital to managing how your body responds to histamine, because it is that element that helps with that cleanup process. If you're not cleaning it up, you're effectively stewing in that histamine a lot longer. And so you're stewing in, however your body chooses to express those impacts a lot longer, right? So when we're talking about methylation, really we're talking about what are the B vitamins, what are the minerals? Are you getting those cofactors that are appropriate to your genes so that you can complete and you can do your methylation properly and therefore do this cleanup properly? Right. So what cofactors are we considering to support methylation to help with this histamine cleanup?
biggest ones, B vitamins.
Yeah.
Uh, those really are so important in the entire methylation pathway. And actually, when you look at the methylation pathway, studying in school, it's like these gear wheels that are all connected, and the way that they, move around and shift that and pass like the baton of the methyl groups,
Mhm.
what's affecting what, but in every single gear wheel that's being moved and around through the pathway, there's always B vitamins.
Mhm.
Those
Yeah.
those are definitely the major ones, and like, well, trimethylglycine, a supplement that we use. Also, having methylation, your SAMe, is
Mhm.
also part of that people can take as supplements. Very, very important during all of this, and also working into changing homocysteine into methionine.
Mhm.
That's very important in that, because obviously for people like me who have dysregulated methylation pathways, I have a poor MTHFR.
Mhm.
And so I have to be mindful of my homocysteine levels and making sure that I support my methylation pathway.
Yeah.
So which other cofactors would you call out besides the B vitamins?
Yeah. I think a lot to minerals, namely magnesium and zinc. Those are really, really, really important cofactors. And for people who are listening to this and being like, these girls are talking Latin, and I think I just tuned out because all I'm hearing is science class. Cool, I see you. I appreciate you. When someone talks finances, I tune out in the same way. So what I would offer is if you have your DNA 360, go into the report, right? Go into your methylation report. And so some of the B vitamins that Dr. Varden, in very beautiful, nerdy biochemical ways that I love so much, thank you, just elaborated on all these B vitamin cofactors. We have genes. She mentioned one of them, MTHFR. We have genes that tell us very specifically the form of these B vitamins that you need. Not all B vitamins are created equal. So one thing, if you're struggling with histamine and you think part of it is because you're not cleaning it up properly, right? One thing you might want to consider doing is going into your methylation report and looking at the specific forms of B as in Bob vitamins that you need, and ensuring you have those properly either supplemented or within your food. You can talk to your practitioner as to what's more appropriate there. Okay. Because we want to make sure if, I love the biochemist out there, Dr. Varden, and you make my heart happy when you dive in the way that you do. But I also appreciate that there's some people in the audience who we're talking Latin to, and no one speaks Latin anymore. At least I wish they did.
Well, we can always jump into the excitement pool and talk about libido and sexual function.
Oh, spicy.
Yes.
Let's hear it. I like this right angle turn. Let's go. Let's go.
Well, we'll perk up a few ears here.
Yes,
Well,
ma'am.
before we dove into the questionnaire, we
Mm-hmm.
spoke about women's
Mm-hmm.
hormones, estrogen, progesterone, which, by the way, yes, men have them too. But we focused more on women in there. And then we were like, oh, we got to touch on the men and
Mm-hmm.
disclude them. So now let's include them when it comes to histamine and hormones. So
Mm.
this is where I wanted to mention histamine is involved in sexual arousal and function. So, hey, it can actually have some
Hey.
good things. Yes, it can. Okay, so studies have actually shown that histamine release in specific areas of the brain can actually promote sexual behavior.
Mm.
However, we don't want too much of a good thing. Although some people would think, how could that be too much of a good thing? Excessive histamine release, as seen in histamine intolerance or mast cell activation syndrome, that can actually contribute to issues like erectile dysfunction.
Mm.
So, okay, yeah, Debbie Downer on this one. Yeah, we don't want too much. Again, we want to have that, just right, that Goldilocks zone. And
Mhm.
when we're talking about testosterone regulation, so testosterone production in men is influenced by overall inflammation and immune balance. And chronic histamine elevation can actually increase systemic inflammation and potentially suppressing that hypothalamic pituitary gonadal, okay, the HPG axis,
Mhm.
and reducing testosterone levels. So again, histamine has a job and it can do very wonderful things, but we don't want it too much
Yeah.
because then it can do some bad things.
Yeah.
So there's for the men, there's for, not leaving them out.
Mm-mm. No, it's it's interesting in that I think just like with stress, right? There's, for sexual arousal or just most things within the body, there's the kind of that very Goldilocks balance of stress, right? You
Mhm.
need just enough stress to have your systems online and working and exercised and happy. But the moment you cross that threshold into that chronic stress state, right? That's when that stress then tears down everything that you want to be happening. Right. And so I'm hearing from you, histamine is no different in that space, in that it's to an extent part of that signaling, part of that arousal signaling, especially within the brain, right? But the moment you kind of step into that space of having too much, especially in that chronic way, it then becomes something that takes from the very thing that you're looking for.
Right. And speaking of stress and cortisol regulation, because
Mm.
cortisol, that's the stress hormone. Histamine actually plays a really important role in the HPA axis. That's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And that regulates stress hormone levels. So, specifically
Mhm.
cortisol release. So, histamine can actually stimulate the release of corticotropin releasing hormone, so CRH, from the hypothalamus. That can lead to increased cortisol production by the adrenal glands, okay, sitting on top of the kidneys. And elevated cortisol can suppress testosterone production, okay,
Mhm.
which can contribute to hormone imbalances in men. Well, of
Mhm.
course, cortisol and stress, this also works for women, okay, but being aware that any kind of stress sensitivity, like high histamine levels, when it is, in higher concentrations and you're in more of that chronic state, coupled with that chronic stress that we seem as a society to be in, that can actually lead to dysregulated cortisol rhythms. That cortisol rhythm is very, very important. We need it to wake us up. If you've ever looked at, cortisol levels, the path, it increases a couple hours after you wake up and it hits its peak, and then it starts coming down and, maybe have a little bit of a increase and then down again, because you need that, for the energy for, being up and getting going. But you don't want it up all the time, because then you're going to have dysregulated sleep. It's going to cause fatigue and mood swings, difficulty managing that stress, and which leads right back into one of the things you were talking about at the top of the hour about the mood, how it works in our brain and how we handle things.
Yeah.
So, did you want to kind of unpack that a little bit more when it comes to, the mood, the behavior, and how we handle that?
Yeah. Well, I think everyone, I had a very wise teacher at one point in time, he's like, he's like, he traveled a lot, and he was like, the only medication I bring along when I travel is an antihistamine. And the reason is it does several different things, right? You have an allergic reaction, you pop an antihistamine. You can't sleep, you pop an antihistamine. If you're super stressed, you pop an antihistamine. He's like, it's kind of three birds, one pill. And so I would lay that out to kind of help you draw the audience, not you, Dr. Varden, you already know this, you could school me in this and I value that. But draw that connection to the audience, right? When was the last time you were struggling to fall asleep and so you reached for an antihistamine? Commonly within, maybe not commonly, but one of the agents used within psychiatry, if you have a client who's at risk for addiction and you're being very mindful of what medication class to be offering them, one thing that is prescribed in the anxiety space is antihistamines. Okay, and the reason for that is, again, within the brain, there's four histamine receptor sorts. All can be within the brain. Well, three of them can be within the brain, but the two major populations are H1 and H3. Okay, so those two sorts. H3, I think, is the more predominant one. And what can happen is when histamine's there, and histamine has a natural role within the body, part of that circadian rhythm, helps you wake up. But when histamine's there, it creates an excitatory feeling. Okay, kind of, at least from the brain perspective, can wake you up. And in too high doses, that waking, that stimulatory feeling, right? That creates your anxiety and propagates it, right? So for example, someone has that histamine reaction, they're exposed to something, right? There's a sense of anxiety that can couple with that, because part of what it's doing within the brain is creating that stimulation. So from a brain perspective, the biggest influence, at least that we look at within our 360, is COMT, right? Because that's so responsible for a lot of that cleanup and other neurotransmitter shifts. Okay. So if you're someone slow, as Dr. Varden mentioned, slow in COMT, poorly in methylation, that's going to be further exacerbated, right? And I would also offer, if you're someone who is in a period of your life where your immune system is a bit dysregulated, meaning you're more prone to be creating these histamines. That means other genes that really naturally lend to your brain's response, right? So a lot of genes that naturally lend to, are you someone who, at base level is a little bit more prone to anxiety? You all the more will probably feel the anxiety side of having higher levels of histamine, either in the moment or from that chronic perspective, right? And so I wonder now if we kind of shift this conversation. I think between the two of us, we've done hopefully a good enough job. In the chat, please let us know, but hopefully a good enough job as to where does histamine land in the body? What sort of things can it cause? A lot of the audience wanted to know, what can you do about it? So we've talked about methylation. We've talked about supporting with B vitamins and some minerals, right? Know your genes and support accordingly. Talked a little bit about glutathione. And so, Dr. Varden, in just a second, I'm going to ask for you to kind of speak to the glutathione side of things. But before we dive into this, I think we'd be remiss. One of the most popular and possibly trendy, if you will, ways of intervening right now with histamine outside of a frank antihistamine like a Benadryl of the world. Um, a lot of what people are exploring are something called DAO supplements. So DAO is one of the primary agents that your body will naturally create in order to help digest and break down histamine. Some people, in particular, people with mast cell activation syndrome. Did I catch that right? Dr. Varden holds me honest to my alliterations because I'm not great at them. Mast cell activation syndrome. For those people that have been diagnosed with that, oftentimes that's coupled with poor production of this. So a lot of people are saying, hey, I'll just supplement with it. You need to talk to your clinician. I'm not going to offer that counsel advice here, but what I will say, especially for people, I'm not encouraging people do their own medicine. I think having a practitioner is very important, but for the rogue folk that go out there and do their own medicine, be very mindful of where you're sourcing it from. I've seen some people walk in kind of sick because the two sources, you can get one plant source, which by and large doesn't often tend to be as effective, I've found. But separate to that, it can be a glandular from animals. And so the quality of that supplement is profoundly important. There are many reasons I think it's important you work with a doctor, but one of the bigger reasons, at least when it comes to histamine, is going to be the quality of that supplement, because you want to know where you're getting that DAO sourced from is a good place. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there. I think I want to shift more into kind of the glutathione conversation. But if you suspect you have histamine issues and you're looking to supplement with that, please align with a practitioner. Okay, I think that's really, really important. And I've seen some people cause unintentional harm to themselves by having the wrong supplement sort there. So Dr. Varden, why don't we dig into glutathione? So how does glutathione play into histamine, and what can we do, especially for the people looking to walk away with a checklist of what can I do to support histamine? I think glutathione is probably one of the bigger general things. So why do we care, and what can we do to support it?
Well, histamine management really focuses on reducing histamine production. We want to improve the breakdown and stabilize those mast cells. So, when we're thinking about ways to do that, and this also supports, glutathione, but we'll get to that in a second. When we're talking about lowering the histamine levels, having a low histamine diet. I mean, it's kind of like Captain Obvious here. Let's not bring in more histamines. So, but what does that look like? What is a low histamine diet or low histamine foods? Well, you want to avoid, well, first of all, avoiding foods with high histamine. So let's go there first. These would be fermented foods. Sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha, and I'm sure a lot of you are going, but hold on, time out.
You always tell me those are so good.
I thought this was supposed to be really good for the gut biome. Well, it is, but if if you are in a situation that you are histamine sensitive, that you are overreactive, that you are in a mast cell activation syndrome situation, yeah, you're only going to cause yourself more problems. You've got to get that managed and under control first.
So hear this, females on the call, be mindful of where you sit in your cycle. And maybe for a week of your cycle, you're not doing your fermented foods. Men of the call, right? Based on environmental exposures, based on certain situational stresses, maybe during those periods now you're not doing those fermented foods, right? So what I'm hearing though is it's situational. Let's break down where else histamine is going to exist in our food, because people, especially who are trying to manage it with stress, are not going to like the rest of the list.
I know. Aged cheeses.
Oh, I can hear audience groan.
For those of you who love your cheese and crackers and pepperonis and meats and I love those.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm hearing it's okay. I can hear the webinar. I hear them crying. That's fine. Toss your cry face emojis. You can send
And
your hate mail to Dr. Varden.
and what
She
do
said
we
it, not me.
usually have? What do we usually have with our cheese and crackers and meats?
Oh, here it comes. 1-2 punch.
Alcohol, especially wine and beer.
Hate mail can go to
So,
Dr. Varden. She said it, not me.
so those charcuterie trays, kind of, you got to cut those out. Other things. Okay, high histamine vegetables. This is like your spinach, eggplant, tomatoes, and I'm sure some of you are kind of like,
Why are you doing
good.
this to me, Dr. Varden?
Other people are like, but
Yeah.
and then I gotta say, this like puts stabs me right through the heart. Some citrus foods and other histamine liberating foods,
Yeah.
strawberries, chocolate. Oh, yeah. I don't think I could ever survive being histamine intolerant or
I
yeah.
will go down as a giant hive if I have to give up my chocolate.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
problem.
One
Um,
other thing I think that Janet very beautifully offered in the chat, she asked the question around leftovers. Thank you for asking this question because this is an important one. So this is very specific to animal meats. So once you have cooked an animal meat and it's been sitting out, you wrap it up, you toss it in the fridge. Over the next day, 24 hours, 48 hours, the concentration of histamine within that is going to increase. I don't know the exact numbers, right? But effectively, the next day, there will be marked amounts of histamine, and come day 3, even though the meat is good from a safety perspective, there's no bacteria, etc., it will be really high in histamine. So some people in particular with histamine intolerances, they struggle more from a digestion perspective. They don't have that DAO. Having um, having meat that is older than a day or so can create histamine issues. Okay. The solution to that is plainly you cook your food, you eat it right away. And if you have leftovers, what you can do is you can freeze it because it will stop that breakdown, right? It's more work on your side in the sense that you'll have to thaw it out and be more mindful as to when you get to consume that leftover. But for those that are histamine sensitive, this can be really life-changing because it is increasing histamine in a non-obvious way.
and
So
and I've gotta break it to Janet. She asks, does fish get a pass? Unfortunately, they are a worse offender than meat. And they actually have higher histamines in a shorter amount of time for leftovers than, say, a steak or something else. So I'm so sorry, Janet. The answer is absolutely not.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
when we're talking about fresh foods, fresh unprocessed meats, fish, vegetables, these are naturally low in histamines. But like what Dr. Krista was saying, when it is sitting and has that time for that breakdown, histamine levels just keep rising. And fish, it's like, phew. So yeah, you really don't want to be eating leftover fish at all. Um,
Or just
if
or
you are
freeze
real
it.
food.
That's not food
Yeah,
waste or
yeah,
food
that's true.
waste.
Because we don't want to be wasting food because really good fish is not cheap. So yeah, I mean, and especially because I do have several clients and I do this myself. I need to prep several days in advance, like meals for the week.
Yeah.
And so therefore it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't type of thing. But do what Krista said, prep and freeze and make sure that you are putting together foods that, can reheat well, that, when you do freeze them and then heat them back up, that they aren't totally disgusting. So,
Yeah, and I think I'm seeing some comments in the chat to the end of, oh Lord, you just put another diet restriction on me. And so what I would offer in particular, people who feel like um they're forced to eat air because they can't eat anything else, right? They're kind of stuck in that air. I always would like jokingly say this, but some people feel as if they're on an air diet, right? They're like, cool, I can't do dairy, I can't do gluten, now I can't do animal meats if they're anything older than 5 hours old, whatever that is. I would say if you feel like you are in the space of having an air diet, my biggest counsel to you would be go find a functional medicine doctor, get evaluated, understand why you've pigeonholed yourself there. What are you trying to solve for? What are the body concerns? And then separate to that, how are you going about solving for them? Because oftentimes when people find themselves in a situation where they're consuming an air diet, right, they're usually so stressed by food that by itself then becomes an even further big aggravator of histamine, of stress, of not being able to digest properly. So we need to relax often some of those conditions on you. There's very few people out there that truly need an air diet, right? And so I would say sometimes it's usually working with a clinician, a third party, right? Someone who hasn't been there the entire time to say, cool, what's wrong? And based on what's wrong, how are we going to go about fixing it in a way where you get to live life and you're not on a diet that stresses you out, and then therefore from that stress further aggravates things and further forces you into an air diet situation. Um, if I can ever liberate wheat for someone and give someone wheat, it is a good day for me. It's not common, but it happens. So sometimes you go to a doctor and they give you more than just air. They give you the beauty that is a croissant. So it's not always a bad thing to go and work with a doctor and hear what needs to be part of your diet.
And it's
Yeah.
also knowing about histamine degrading nutrients. It's not like all food is evil and is going to raise histamines. So it's
Yeah.
just knowing when are they best to help degrade histamine, like vitamin C. This is a natural antihistamine and a mast cell stabilizer. These come in things like bell peppers, citrus fruit, berries. Now, granted, I know I said, oh, strawberries and things like that, but again, when are you eating them? Are they organic? Eating them right away. There are still ways that you can do this. B6, okay, in the form of like P5P, pyridoxal 5 phosphate. This
Shoot.
supports DAO enzyme activity. I practiced.
I'm so proud of you.
This supports DAO enzyme activity for histamine breakdown. These are things like food sources that have P5P in it. Is poultry, fish, bananas. And I know you'll be saying, wait, you just said fish. We can't have fish. Yes, you can. Just have it fresh. Eat it right away. If you're not going to be, or prepping, freeze it right away. It's when it is sitting for a while, leftovers. Okay. That's when the histamine levels start going up. But they are beautiful sources of so many different nutrients that are included in histamine degradation. So it's the timing, it is the source. These are the things important. It doesn't mean that you have to have an air diet. That
Yeah.
would really
Yeah.
suck.
And it's again, I think knowing your body and knowing where you're at, right? Dr. Varden has just very elegantly gone through an antihistamine diet to a certain extent, right? Or a low histamine diet. And unless you're in a space where histamine truly is a concern, i.e., you and a practitioner have met, you've been evaluated, and it's a concern, that's not something you necessarily need to be doing every day. Maybe it's something for females at certain part of your cycle, you're doing that, right? For males, it's a certain point of stress or environmental exposures, right? So remember that what we just listed here is a very medical diet. Do you need to be doing this all the time? Absolutely not. It should be either situationally inspired or separate to that, under the guidance and the support of a practitioner, so that you're not on that diet forever and you're not reducing yourself down to an air diet where you can't have chocolate, because why on earth would you want to be alive if you can't have chocolate? I don't know.
Not me. Forget it. I'd be out of here.
Yeah, there's other people here who would say the same. And I wonder on that note, let us know if you're a chocoholic. We'll create a support group where we just send one another chocolate. But separate to that, why don't we start diving into some of the questions, because I see some really juicy ones coming up, and Bon dia. I want to make sure we have time to get through them all. There are quite a few here.
Yeah, this
So
is a very popular topic.
yes, ma'am. All right. Um, Dirk has a question. I'm gonna offer that second because I see he corrected it, so I want to capture that correctly. So we're gonna move on to Teresa's and we'll come back to Dirk's question. Um, So Teresa is asking, if possible, how best to clear histamine response without medications. Do you recommend using a DAO supplement or a specific type of probiotic strain? Ooh, fun, juicy question. So Teresa, I think we just went through some of the diet things. And so I would say between that and environmental exposures, right, identifying what's creating the histamine is where I would start before I would dive into some of the supplements, right?
Yeah.
From a supplement side of things, I think you have to look in two different ways. A DAO supplement really, I would offer is probably something more targeted towards those people with mast cell activation syndrome, and that's demonstrated. There's blood work that you can demonstrate that through. I'd really recommend working with a practitioner. Okay. More situational needs. If you're a more allergic person and you're going through certain things, maybe you use that situationally. But as to other supplements, I love kind of the idea around probiotics or supplements that, as Dr. Varden and I have discussed, support methylation or separately support glutathione, some of the things that will naturally help clean up your system. Dr. Varden, for glutathione specifics, I think we went over supplements for methylation, but for glutathione specific, do you have any favored supplements there?
Well, definitely having something that includes N-acetylcysteine,
Mm,
because that is a precursor to glutathione.
yes, ma'am.
Selenium is also a very important cofactor.
Mhm.
And for those people, I mean, you can also take glutathione. There's liposomal glutathione. You can even do glutathione IV, um, you know, IV pushes. You can do a lot of different things. But for those of you who may have a genetic presentation where glutathione, that form, is not appropriate for you, this is where the cofactors, uh, the forms that help to make glutathione, like N-acetylcysteine, that's where that would be very important. Also, things like alpha lipoic acid, really getting the molecules that help to make glutathione to get your body to make it.
Yeah. And I think if you're also looking for a relatively cheap solution, Dr. Varden has offered this, and I don't think she registered her own brilliance, vitamin C. And in particular, what you might want to consider instead of doing larger dosing once or twice a day, and this will take a bit of commitment, but doing small doses throughout the day. So maybe 500 milligrams, 4 to 5 times throughout your day, as opposed to a gram here and there. That kind of level of vitamin C can help support, especially with mast cells and some of the immune system, balancing of that. So that could also be something. And vitamin C is beautifully cost effective or cost accessible. All right. So let me jump into Dirk's question here.
Yeah,
Um,
actually, was reading that and kind of formulating.
Fabulous. Do you want to offer Dirk's question as I prep the next question then?
I really would, because he's asking basically what part of the body is detecting a threat and producing histamine. Is the immune system doing the detection of the threat and producing the histamine? And what would that mean? As far as like where histamine is produced, and he's asking, is it produced in the bone marrow? If not, then where? And how does all of this work? What's the production mechanism? And something I had mentioned more at the top of the hour of this webinar is that histamine and the production of it, the release of it as well, are central to the body's immune and inflammatory responses. So while the immune system detects threats, histamine is produced and stored in the specialized cells, mast cells, basophils, not in the bone marrow where these immune cells are primarily formed. Okay. So, and mast cells, basophils, these are in the bloodstream. Okay. But mast cells are often found in the tissues themselves. So, depending on where the particular problem, the antigen, non-scientific words, where the foreign object, the threat is, showing up. This is where they will be incited the most. Okay. So for example, Krista rolling on the grass, guess where it's going to show up first? On her skin. Okay. So again, it really works into those two primary cells are responsible for detecting the threats and then releasing the histamine. And this is where the receptors, because they actually have IgE receptors, immunoglobulin E. Like there's different immunoglobulin types. There's like IgG, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. There's IgA, IgM. IgE actually is most common with allergies. And you will see that if you ever do like a food sensitivity test, it'll be like an IgG and IgE, so they'll actually look at those particular signals and how you are reacting. So, I mean, and again, they're found all over the body.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I love it. Thank you, Dr. Varden.
I answered your question appropriately, Dirk. Let me know if it didn't.
All right. I'm going to speak to a question from Heather. Heather is asking, is spontaneous anaphylaxis a genetic condition only, or would gut health directly be related to this? So let's start with spontaneous anaphylaxis. So spontaneous anaphylaxis is what happens when there is an anaphylactic reaction that doctors or a person cannot trace back to a known trigger, meaning all of a sudden a person swells up as if they've been exposed to, in my instance, a peanut, but we can't figure out what exactly is the peanut for that person. When you look into what is causing that, right, we don't know. It's a condition we call idiopathic, idio meaning we don't know. So to break this down, some people might be tied to the gut more from a mast cell perspective, and other people's might be something truly idiopathic in that they're reacting to something in their environment and we don't know what that is. So this is a little bit of a tricky question. I think first and foremost, you do have to establish that there was truly an anaphylactic, like a very strong histamine related reaction. One way that you can do this, and this is part of your mast cell workup anyway, you need to work with the doctor for this because you need to get some blood taken. But following one of those events, you quite literally within the hour, time is very important for this. This is why mast cell activation syndrome is so difficult to diagnose, but quite literally within that hour of that moment of that activity happening, you need to get blood drawn. They're going to look for an enzyme called tryptase, I think it is. Dr. Varden, hold me honest, I think it's tryptase. They're going to measure that level, and based off of that, they'll be able to better establish what has gone on, what is the histamine response within the body, and then that can then further trigger our cue and guide things. So sometimes it will be gut related, other times not so much. Really getting that next diagnostic step is probably the most important there, right? Because there's an element of got to figure out the trigger, which is going to be allergy testing and investigation, and separate to that, need to establish what's actually going on. And that blood work tends to be one of the first and more important steps, because if you're truly having that anaphylaxis reaction, right? Anaphylaxis meaning there's incredible swelling of the tissues to the point where you're going to be occluding your airway. They swell to the point where you close up the airway. That's the danger of anaphylaxis. Those reactions based on repeated exposures tend to get more strong and pronounced. And so you want to be getting a doctor's care right away. This is not something you want to be playing with yourself. This is something you want to be ushered into very significant medical care quickly so you understand the why of it. Okay. I hope that was helpful. Dr. Varden, do you want to jump into our next question?
Yes, this question is from Becky. And she asked, can DAO enzymes reduce total body burden of histamine? And well, the thing is that, DAO can obviously significantly reduce histamine but more so from a dietary or gut. It's localized in the GI, in the gut. Okay. They don't metabolize histamine circulating in the bloodstream or released by mast cells in other tissues, for example, like the skin or the lungs, or elsewhere. There is, for example, HNMT. So it's histamine N-methyltransferase. This is the primary enzyme that's responsible for breaking down histamine in tissues and the central nervous system. DAO supplementation doesn't affect that activity. So, when you start getting outside of the non-gut histamine sources, DAO, it really is unaffected by that. So it can be good, in some ways, but no, it doesn't help for the total body burden.
Yeah. And I think this beautifully kind of dovetails into the next question that Deborah is asking. So Deborah's asking, how do you clear histamine reactions within the brain? And so I want to chunk this down to in the moment and then the prevention thereof. So in the moment, right? There's an element of in the moment when you're kind of in the throes of it, there isn't too much to be done, right? Other than, ensuring you have that adequate supplementation. You can consider an antihistamine, which will block the binding of it, right? That's a very momentary support there. But outside of that, this is more in the prevention, right? You really want to think through reducing that exposure. What is causing that creation of histamine? Right. So is it environmental, reducing those environmental things? Is it because you don't have your methylation in check? Is it because you have your immune system not in check, right? Supporting those, right? You can also look at things that might to the end stabilize some of those systems. So the quercetins, the vitamin C's, the NACs, the things that we've mentioned, right? And then separate to that, really looking to reduce load through diet and other sorts of things. Okay. But I think, and then atop that also, like you have an interaction, you take your histamine to kind of get through the moment, the cleanup after that, focus on sleep and focus on things that really activate the glymphatic system or the scrubby system within the brain. Sleep is when that is best done. So, I mean, 1-2 punch in the sense you take an antihistamine, it can create drowsiness by blocking those receptors. And during that time, you still want to support with more sleep, better sleep, good sleep, because that's when everything's going to be cleaned up as well. So in the moment, think maybe an antihistamine. Immediately after, get your Z's on. And then in the prevention of that, going through some of the things that we've spoken about tonight: diet, supplements, or environmental surveys. Yeah. All right.
So our next question is by Renee, and they ask, are there histamine reactions in digestion like bloating? Absolutely. Histamine reactions in digestion can manifest in a lot of different ways. Symptoms like, you said, bloating, also abdominal pain, diarrhea, nausea, other GI disturbances, that we often don't like to talk about or think about. Yeah, they are often related to histamine in the gut. And this is where that previous question I talked about, the DAO, can actually be more helpful. So,
yeah, I love that. All right. Audrey with a D, not Aubrey with a B. Audrey is asking the question, can histamine responses change over time with lifestyle and diet changes? So independent of diet and lifestyle, we've kind of talked in particular for females over the course of a lifetime, sensitivity to histamine is going to change. I would also offer that happens with males too, naturally, as testosterone supplies change, and as well as how prone or susceptible one is to inflammation. So over the course of one's lifetime, that will absolutely. Now, separate to that, diet and lifestyle do really play into how sensitive are you or how trigger happy you're going to be to creating your histamine. And I want to offer a positive story because I think the positive stories are key here. I had a client, a patient that came in with marked, debilitating sort of seasonal allergies. Okay. Seasonal allergies to the point where spring and fall, they were kind of a running faucet, and it truly debilitated their life, right? In the sense that like you can't go out if you're always blowing your nose, right? That sort of thing. Through the course of our work together, we actually unearthed, right, that they were celiac. And we started directly influencing that, started working exclusively on diet and removal and cleanup there. Naturally, through that, through cleaning up that offending agent in their body that not only created inflammation, but separately stopped them from being able to absorb nutrition properly, through that, their seasonal allergies went away. Okay. So I did absolutely nothing to directly impact histamine or the response of the body. Instead, we cleaned up something that made it more difficult for the body to properly respond to. Okay. So this person's seasonal allergies went away based on cleaning up diet for another medical condition. For that person, and specifically, it was celiac. Okay. So can your histamine response change in response to your diet or various medical conditions? Absolutely. So this is where it's important to an extent to speak with a doctor, right? I think if I had just focused, or if we hadn't done testing for this person, we would have exclusively been focused on histamine and allergic picture when that wasn't the true root cause of it, right? Their body could manage all of that. It was just they couldn't manage the gluten because they were celiac. So engage with a practitioner. I think in particular, if you think histamine is a struggle for you, because unless you have mast cell, oftentimes it's going to be secondary to something else. Yeah.
Well, we've got our next question is from Christine, and she says, I'm past menopause. Is there a role of histamine and cancer? Can you please explain diet? So histamine's role in cancer, it actually has a dual role. And of course, it also depends on the type of cancer, the histamine receptors involved, the tumor microenvironment. I mean, it's nuanced, but understanding it is very important. So, for example, and I'll just give a few highlights. Histamine can actually promote the growth of blood cells. Okay, it's called angiogenesis. And this is through the H1 and H2 receptors. And that actually can help support tumor growth and metastasis in certain cancers, like, breast cancer and gastrointestinal cancers. It can also it can suppress the immune system's ability to attack cancer cells, especially with the way that it modulates mast cells and like myeloid-derived suppressor cells. So basically the cells that help to stop or lessen, the tumor to growing. Okay. It can enhance the immune system surveillance, though. And what it does is it actually helps to activate certain immune cells called natural killer cells and T cells. Okay. And this is primarily through the H4 receptor. There are different aspects. Let me jump down and think to, okay. You mentioned about menopause because I don't want to gloss over this. So, like I had said before, with estrogen and histamine, so that increasing, post-menopause, of course, we know we've got lower estrogen levels. So that can actually reduce some of the histamine-driven processes, okay? But other pathways can persist or get worse, like chronic inflammation. When we're talking about possible breast cancer risk, like histamine can actually interact with estrogen receptors in breast tissue, and that can also influence cancer risk. Chronic histamine elevation can actually exacerbate, can make the inflammation worse, and oxidative stress. That contributes to DNA damage, tumor development. I mean, you can see where all of these things are connected. Like I said, systems biology, one thing affects the other, like a little domino. But getting back to diet, like you had asked, It's the same type of thing like we talked about earlier in this webinar. You want to look at a low histamine diet. Avoid those high histamine foods that we've already gone through. Focus on the low histamine foods. So a few other vegetables like throwing out there, it's like, okay, what were they again besides air? Unprocessed meats, fish, consuming immediately after purchase. Vegetables like zucchini, carrots, cucumbers, leafy greens, also non-citrus fruit, apples, pears, blueberries, things like that. And if working off of your client, gluten and celiac, gluten-free grains like rice and quinoa can actually, you know, be eaten, so you're eating something more than air.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's really important if there's a concern of cancer, right? Really doing a thorough plan and investigation with a clinician, because we don't want you necessarily, like, I think what Dr. Varden is getting to, the the cause of most cancers, 80% of the cancers out there, is secondary to inflammation, other body systems not working. Is histamine one of them? Sure. Absolutely. Yes. But you don't want to focus exclusively on that when there's other susceptibilities within your body. And so I think this is where knowing your DNA and working with a practitioner is very, very important, because you want to know you're chasing down the right things, right? You don't want to be chasing down histamine if truly your issue is more hormonal because you struggle with those pathways. Yeah, it's not to discount anything that Dr. Varden said. It's more to be very specific and plain. That's important you work with the provider to understand truly what is the root cause. Because again, I think going back to my client, they came in for seasonal allergies, and it was not actually seasonal allergies that was their problem, right? It was something else. And so being able to dig down and truly figure that out is important.
Yeah. And the information that we provide and things like what I'm talking about is for educational purposes only. Okay. This is, theoretical. I mean, I'm a researcher. I am a scientist at heart, and I worked in a cancer lab, working on cancer cells and doing that. So, we had to do a lot of research on that. So this is that educational, like, what's in the literature, what has been found. And Dr. Krista so beautifully works that into, okay, now here's in the clinical sense. This is, really how this anecdotal situation happened with her own client, but always don't be taking these things into your own hands. Like she said, work with someone who knows what they're doing, who is a professional, because there's so much more to you than just these simple questions or these one or two symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it breaks my heart sometimes when I see people come in and their life is so regimented in what they do and what they eat and what how they engage. And it doesn't necessarily need to be. Some people, sure, yes, I don't want to take that away, but not everyone. And I would hate to see someone living a very constrained life when they don't necessarily need to. Because I mean, as we part of our intro and outro, we dance, right? You want to find that joie de vivre that gets you up and going. And I promise for most people, it's with a croissant, and we don't want to take croissants needlessly away from people. All right, I'm gonna move
True.
on with some of the questions. Donna, and this is going to echo a little bit back to my other answer, but Donna's saying she did a liver cleanse program and developed a histamine reaction, not Skinner respiratory, but terrible hay fever. It was resolved as soon as she did the flush. I never would have made an association between the liver and hay fever. Can you explain? Yeah. So so part of what the liver's job is, right? It filters all your blood, and it does two different things. So it kind of surveys what's in the blood, what's going on in the world, what do I need to respond to, what do I need to clean out, what's going on. And separate to that, another part of its job is to literally do that cleaning process. So kind of one of surveillance and one of actually doing some of the dirty work, right? Your kidneys do some of it, your sweating does some of it, there's other mechanisms, right? And so when you are overwhelming your liver, meaning you are forcing it to clean up a lot of different junk. It's kind of one of those, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. You can develop sensitivities that maybe otherwise wouldn't exist because your liver can manage them on a normal day. But if it's overtaxed, if a liver can deal with 100 things in a day and you're asking it to do 150, that remaining 50 is going to cause you problems, right? So I can't speak to the liver detox you did. Sometimes people will have allergies to liver detox. Don't do a liver detox until you're consulting with a physician. Sometimes there's funky herbs in there that maybe your body isn't going to respond well to. But sometimes it's naturally through most of these protocols, you're reducing exposures. And so it gives your body a chance to clean up, and then that can resolve some things. So I would imagine, kind of like with my patient who had celiac, and once we resolved that, seasonal allergies were gone. Maybe there was something within diet or within lifestyle that was, getting your liver to do 150 things when it could only manage 100. So I hope, Donna, that answered your question there. Yeah. Dr. Lara, do you want to speak to Nora's question?
Absolutely. So let's see. Nora asks, could going through a parasite detox be the cause for histamine reactions due to the parasites releasing lots of toxins as they die? And yeah, I mean, when someone is going through a parasite detox, that could indeed trigger histamine reactions because those those metabolites, then breaking down. First of all, they're like, no, we want to stay. And that release, these are foreign substances. These are things that our body are like, yeah, you shouldn't be here. So let's take care of this. This is triggering those basophils, the mast cells, that the whole reason of things that we have been talking about, of the work that it does. And actually when the parasites die, it's called die-off reaction, or actually a Herxheimer's reaction, where it involves an inflammatory response triggered by the immune system as it processes and eliminates these byproducts of the dying parasites. So yeah, absolutely, that would do that. But all the more to make sure that when you are doing any kind of detox protocol, that you are working with someone who knows what they're doing and who can help you navigate all the nuances of it, because there are processes and things that you can and should be doing to help alleviate any symptoms or exacerbations that can cause Herxheimer reactions. If you're doing it right, having someone who knows what they're doing, you shouldn't be having those severe reactions. That doesn't need to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in the West, we have this idea, if it hurts, it's probably working more. And oftentimes with Herxheimer, it's a signal you're asking the body to do more than it can, and you need to back off and re-strategize a little bit. Yeah. Very, very well said, Dr. Varden. Evelyn is saying, so she says she's a homozygous SNP for C677T, which is an MTHFR SNP, but has low homocysteine. How does that happen? Like, that doesn't make sense to her. And what can she do about the situation, please? I'm not sure if you have I would imagine you're referring a suboptimal SNP there. So what I would say is actually take a step back, right? I think when it comes to methylation, the MTHFR gene, and in particular, the SNP, has been kind of positioned as the be all and end all. This SNP tells you everything about methylation, and unfortunately, that's categorically not true. Methylation is a beautiful sequence of different enzymes working to toss around a methyl group and look at homocysteine and change into methionine and backwards and all the fun things. But it's a team effort. And so knowing one player in this team effort, in this team chain, actually isn't that helpful. You need to know what's going on in the whole team. So I would imagine the disconnect for you is you're trying to connect a single player to the entire game, or sorry, to the entire team. And so what I would offer is look in your DNA 360, look at the full concert of genes there. And I would suspect possibly some of your struggles there is going to sit with either your MTR or your MTRR. Or separate to that, from a diet perspective, you're not well supported in the proper form of B9, the proper form of B12, magnesium, zinc, the proper form of B6. There's so many things that play into methylation. So my suspicion is your homocysteine is super low. Like I'm imagining you're talking kind of like a medically low level, so not the good low, but like beyond that, possibly because those things are too aggressively supported, or there's some other conditioning going on there. So I'd look to those genes first, and then separate to that, maybe even engaging with a practitioner because you might be overdoing some of your methylation there. Yeah. All right. Um, Dr. Varden, do you want to jump into the next question? I think we're going tick for tat. I like this quid pro quo.
Yeah,
It's helpful.
absolutely. Okay, so Faye is asking, what about women with low testosterone?
Love that
And
question.
yeah, I mean, the thing is that, well, we know because I had mentioned it earlier that testosterone does have anti-inflammatory properties that help stabilize mast cells, which are responsible for releasing the histamine. In women with low testosterone, uh, this reduced stabilization of the mast cells can possibly lead to increased histamine release. Obviously, it then exacerbating histamine intolerance symptoms. It is also something that, with testosterone helping to support histamine breakdown, working, like what the liver does, and uh, not having that, obviously, that is impaired. So I'm sure you're probably thinking, okay, well, what does this look like? What do I do about it? When you're looking at certain symptoms of histamine in women with low testosterone. So this could be things like itching, hives, nasal congestion, sinus issues, headaches, migraines, the GI issues that I talked about earlier that I'd mentioned from a question earlier, bloating, diarrhea, cramps, things like that. Also low libido, with the low testosterone, the higher histamine, when it's not in balance doing the job that it should be doing, that really puts a kibosh on those fun activities. Um, also with fatigue,
Yeah.
mood disorders, circling back to what we were talking about in the beginning, the things that you had mentioned about, mood and our brain function. So, really, what do you do about it? Do the things that we've been talking about. Definitely, see a doctor who knows how to assess this correctly, because we're not just saying, oh, low testosterone, high histamine, this is your main problem. It may not be. But
Yeah.
eating right, low histamine foods, doing the things that we've been talking about, making sure, yes, the sleep is so important. And making sure that you have the nutrients that your body needs for the repair while you're sleeping. Like, let's stack these and make it work for you.
Yeah.
So,
Love it.
all
Thank you.
right, Tag, you're it.
Oh my gosh, I was always so bad at tag. I'm too clumsy for it. Oh, Monsia. Audrey with a D, not a B. She's asking why does she react to some avocados and not others? So in Dr. Varden's list of things that might increase histamine and rob me of joy, like chocolate, um, avocados for some people can increase histamine. And so there's going to be two answers to this, Audrey, and I don't know which will be true for you. The two variables is your body is never the same day over day. And so there could be an element of maybe your biome is just more primed to be reacting to the avocado in some different way. Maybe your immune system is triggered in some different way. So there can be some very body-based reasons as to how you receive that food. Separate to that, you're never going to eat the same avocado twice, right? Growing conditions will influence some of the things within the avocado that might further create that histamine reaction. So unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you because there's two pretty big variables at play. But if you notice that avocados are a problem for you, you might want to look into, is it a digestive problem, right? It's actually more secondary to you're not digesting it properly. Or is it kind of body super sensitive, or maybe different sorts of avocados, like maybe the ones, if you live in California and you happen to be close to them, might be good compared to the ones maybe you get from Mexico further far away in different soils. There's a lot to that, and I apologize that I cannot be more helpful. So tag your it. I won tag.
Okay. So I was kind of perusing the next couple of questions, and the one from Nora, because she asks, do you have any specific brands for antihistamines that you can buy over the counter versus a prescription? And honestly, I can't give you a really good answer for that because I'm not a medical doctor, so I do not prescribe. I don't go in that realm. And as far as like over the counter, I really try to stay away from those too. So I'm not really a great source when it comes to that. I try to keep with more of the natural, with the foods, the supplements, lifestyle. So I'm going to kick this over to you, Krista. Do you have, any comments on that? Because I really want to answer Lisa's question.
Yeah. All right. Well, you gear up for Lisa then. Look at you tossing tag back in my face. That's fine. I see you. Specific to if I would really encourage, if you're at the point where you think you're taking antihistamines on more than an occasional basis, make an appointment with your doctor or allergist, or get to the root cause of this. Because I mean, we don't want medications on a daily, at least for histamine issues. By and large, if you need them on a daily basis, you probably should be working with a practitioner to see why, so that you can reduce that. Okay. Separate to that, if this is more episodic, right? You're going to a barn and you're going to react poorly and you want to bring something. By and large, at least within Canada and the US, drugs are pretty tightly regulated. And so you can even go with a generic over-the-counter brand if you want. One thing that I'm starting to see be more and more common, and you might want to consider, especially within whatever company, we don't really need to advocate for one or the other, because once it's passed various health bodies' approval, it's the same agent within there. It's no longer trademark, so anyone can make it so long as they reach those specifications. You don't per se need to go with a brand. But one thing I'm seeing really popular within the over-the-counter space is these agents being offered without dyes or other things that people who have that bigger allergic picture might be sensitive to. So that's one thing I would really encourage, looking for the antihistamine, the Benadryl of the world, right? That does not have dyes or other additives to it, that when you're in that allergic state is just going to kind of further muddy the waters. So go see your doctor and find one without a dye would be my advice there.
And just for clarification, it's not a matter of trademarks expiring, it's a matter of the patents expiring. So just
look at you, American. I love it. Thank you.
You're Canadian, we'll give you a pass. Getting to Lisa's question, she said, can you explain B12 versus B9? She said she thought that B12 was folate or folic acid because her DNA happens to take folinic acid and methylfolate, and the B12 B9 thing was just a little jumbled. So let me clear that up for you. So B9 is folate. B12 is called cobalamin. Now, in your DNA reports, and this would be in your methylation report, when you are looking at the SHMT1 gene, based on that presentation, for example, if you have an A, okay, in your in the gene, okay, as one of the variants, then instead of methylated form, you should have the adenosylated form. The only thing is that because you can't buy it like that, it actually comes in folinic acid as compared to methylfolate. So not trying to confuse you more. It's just that that is the difference. So folate B9, if you want it methylated, it's called methylfolate. If you don't want it methylated, then you want to get folinic acid, not folic acid. Folic acid is actually synthetic and not very good. Dr. Ben Lynch has done a tremendous amount of research in this area, brilliant, and has done a lot of work, and actually has wonderful videos and write-ups about the research on folic acid as compared to folinic acid. And then, of course, cobalamin, your B12, that can also come in a methylated form, methylcobalamin, or an adenosylated form, adenosylcobalamin. So that's the difference.
Yep. I love it. Thank you. All right, Faye has some questions and I'm going to group some of them together. She's asking after specific foods. So she's asking around yogurt, and I imagine that sits in the fermented category. And so yogurt does fit into kind of some of those fermented foods that episodically or as part of a medical diet you might want to avoid. She's also asking about our very precious and treasured chocolate. Namely, she's asking for a distinction. Is there a distinction when it comes to histamine between cacao, that which our chocolate is sourced from, and chocolate, kind of the more processed food? So from the chocolate side of things, darker chocolates, that higher concentration of cacao, tend to be a little bit more histamine inducing. That said, if you're digging into the milk side of it and you are sensitive to the chocolate, having the milk and the sugar and whatever additives candy companies feel the right to add to the sacred food, which is chocolate, that can be problematic. So there's an element of kind of trial and error there. What are you sensitive to? Does the added sugar and the added milk ingredients further aggravate you? When it comes to more the unprocessed cacao, right? Studies show a little bit of a less of a histamine reaction there, but I would say at this point in time, you're kind of splitting hairs. If you're to the point where you're thinking about taking chocolate out because of the histamine reaction, probably both might want to come out, and then consulting with your doctor as to proper diet and how on earth can you reincorporate chocolate in, because I think that's a very good health goal. No bias from me at all. All right. The last question here, and Dr. Lara, actually, I imagine I'll let you answer this one, but it's, what about canned fish? This is from Cindy, and I would imagine this has to do with histamine
Oh, yes.
responses again. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, okay. First of all, yes, histamine levels in canned fish can be high, can be, okay, especially if the fish was improperly handled or stored before processing, and you're thinking, how am I going to verify that? Well, you kind of can't too much, but there are certain types of fish that are naturally prone to histamine formation because they just contain high levels of free histidine. Now, histidine is an amino acid that can be converted into histamine by bacteria. So histidine with a D is the amino acid. It can be converted into histamine. Okay, so, and you're probably wondering, okay, well, which what? So common culprits. Okay, so fish that are naturally high in histidine levels, that are often canned: tuna, mackerel, sardines, anchovies, and honestly, I love these. And I get them canned at my co-op because it's not like these are very easily found fresh necessarily. So again, I feel the pain, along with that.
Yeah.
Not as bad as chocolate. I could probably give up fish, but I can't give up chocolate. So there are certain regulations though. Like FDA for US and EU guidelines for Europe and things like that. Histamine levels, I think it's like 50 parts per million, can cause mild symptoms, and levels above like 200 parts per million can actually lead to very severe histamine poisoning, actually. And they do test these. These are regulated. So that really gets down to what I initially said about improperly handled canned fish. So this is where quality matters. Pay attention to the company.
Mhm.
There's a wonderful company, and I'm not going to go naming names, but there is a company that actually has very low mercury levels. I mean, way below, the allowable limit, that that's out there that you can purchase. Yeah, you do pay a little bit more. And yes, that's mercury and not necessarily histamines. And it's not like they have it on the label going, hey, this has been tested for histamines and this is what the level is. But generally, if you find a company that is that thoughtful in, the mindfulness into knowing that there are toxins in these products, how can we lower as much? Can usually be correlated for them being mindful about other things, but you can always go on their website or even call them, ask for third-party testing results, ask them directly, what are your levels? Do some of your own research, especially if you are really sensitive and you really don't want to start giving up some of these things. You might have to, but
For a while,
for a while, yes.
with the goal of always bringing them back in.
Correct.
Chocolate is a valid health goal.
Yes.
I think that's my new mantra. Chocolate is a valid health goal.
I'll
Mon
take
Dieu, can you tell it is the end of our day, family? Okay, all right. So, on that beautiful note that I've identified absolutely everyone's health goal, which is chocolate, I think we are going to bid you adieu. Dr. Varden, as always, you impress and you mystify with the precision that you have in regards to speaking to science and then making it human. So, thank you so very much. To our audience, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your curiosity around histamine. And we really encourage you, if histamine's a concern of yours, you either got to be evaluated for mast cell or separately, we need to figure out what's triggering all this histamine, because rarely is it going to be truly a mast cell. Gotta get to the root cause there. We want you keeping your chocolate. So on the note of chocolate is a health goal. Let us dance. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Have a delightful evening. Go have some chocolate. We gonna
Oh,
dance out because I'm gonna go dance to my chocolate.
absolutely.
Oh, ladies.
Thank you, Dr. Krista. Awesome.